Okay, here's a quick rundown of each of the amendments. First Amendment, freedom of religion, very important, two parts. Free exercise clause, you're free to pick whatever religion you want. Establishment clause, the government doesn't get to pick one for you, so no state-sponsored religion. First Amendment, other parts, freedom of assembly, freedom of petition, the press, the speech. This all combines to give you your freedom of expression. You can go out in public, join groups, join organizations that organize and try to get things done. You can petition, ask the government to do something or stop doing something. You can print your thoughts in newspapers, on the internet, TV, radio without censorship by the government, and you can speak your mind, put your opinions out there, both symbolically through signs you hold up and through your actual spoken speech. Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, the right to own a weapon. Controversial. Did it mean that you had the right to have a gun to defend the country as part of a militia, or a right to have a handgun in your home? It's been interpreted the second way. Third Amendment hasn't come up much, but remember the British used to keep soldiers in the homes of the colonists. They wanted to make sure the new government wouldn't be doing that to them, so they said no quartering of soldiers. In Fourth Amendment, no unreasonable search or seizure without a valid search warrant or probable cause. This is where things come into play with interpretation. What's unreasonable to you might not be unreasonable to a judge. Basically, they have to have a reason before they go into your car, but the judge decides what's reasonable or unreasonable. Could be your car, could be your home, could be your cell phone. Technology comes into play. Fifth Amendment, also dealing with rights of people accused of a crime. Number one, you have the right to remain silent. If you're accused of a crime, you don't have to be the one that gives them the evidence to find you guilty. They have to find other evidence, fingerprints, witnesses see you do the crime. You don't have to cooperate if you don't want to. Indictment, they have to present evidence to officially charge you. Police officers can arrest whoever they want. There are bad police officers. There are good ones. If a bad police officer arrests somebody, maybe they don't actually have some evidence. Eventually, they'll have to present that evidence to prove that the trial should continue. That is referred to as an indictment. Double jeopardy. You can't be tried twice for the same crime. If you commit a crime and you're put on trial and a jury finds you not guilty, if they find evidence 2 years later, they can't put you on trial again for that same particular crime. Eminent domain, taking private property for public use. If they want to build a school, if they want to build a road and your house is in the way, they can take your private property. A school or a road is a public use. The protection this amendment provides you is that they must compensate you. They have to give you just compensation. If you don't like the offer, you can challenge it, and a court can decide if they offered you a fair amount of money for your land. Due process encompasses all of the above. They have to follow all established procedures in a case before they can deprive you of your life, liberty, or property, before they can execute you, before they can take your liberty by putting you in jail, or take away your property by fining you in some way. They've got to give you all of the rights that you are entitled to, your due process, what you're entitled to as far as procedure goes. Sixth Amendment includes the right to an attorney. This is sometimes referred to as counsel or a lawyer, but you have the right to one of those, and it's later been interpreted that even if you cannot afford one, one should be appointed to you. You have the right to a jury trial, which will be speedy and public. They can't do it in private where nobody sees what's happening, and they can't delay it for years at a time to give themselves an advantage. And you also have the right to question and obtain witnesses. That means if someone's accusing you of a crime, you have the right to question them. You can try to poke holes in their statement, show how they are the liar and you are not the one that committed the crime. And you also have the right to obtain witnesses. Maybe you have somebody that can prove that you're innocent, but they're not willing to come to court. You can get what's called a subpoena and force them to testify on your behalf if it can prove that you're innocent. The Fifth and Sixth Amendments in place to protect you if you're accused of a crime from a government that can take away your liberty and take away your life potentially if the crime is serious enough. The Seventh Amendment gives you that same right to a jury trial that you have in the Sixth Amendment, but this time it's in a civil case. So Fifth and Sixth Amendment are dealing with criminal cases. Your liberty is on the line. Sometimes court cases aren't about somebody that broke the law. They're about some sort of disagreement. These are called civil cases. You're suing somebody, taking them to court because you want damages. Maybe you were medically hurt in an accident no law was broken, but you want the other side to pay your medical bills. That's called a civil case. You have the right to a jury trial in any case where the value is more than $20 at stake. Eighth Amendment, no cruel or unusual punishment. Torture is essentially outlawed by this. But again, words here are vague. The words cruel and unusual can be interpreted differently over time. What was cruel and unusual in 1789 may not be what we consider to be cruel and unusual today. Many of the pictures you see on the screen here have been banned over time, and we can still use things like the death penalty, but the methods that are used are always changing and becoming maybe a little less cruel and unusual as society matures. And also, no excessive bail, no excessive fines. They can't give you a fine of $10 million for shoplifting a pack of gum. They can't give you an excessive amount of bail if you just committed a minor crime. So punishment has to fit the crime, would be what the Eighth Amendment is all about. Ninth Amendment, James Madison, the writer of the Bill of Rights, initially opposed the entire idea because he was afraid if he wrote down a bunch of rights, it would imply that there were no more rights. The Ninth Amendment solves that. You have more rights than those are listed. Where to work, where to live, who to marry, etc., etc. All those things have been interpreted under the Ninth Amendment. The 10th Amendment, the Anti-Federalists, made them happy. They wanted to make sure the central government wouldn't have too much power. The 10th Amendment clarifies if it's not listed in the Constitution as a power of the national or federal government, that means that it's reserved for the states. So because there was no mention of education in the Constitution, that means that that's a reserved power of the states. Federalism, that's where that idea of reserved powers originates with the 10th Amendment. Now moving on past the Bill of Rights into amendments beyond there, many of them have been added to change things that Americans have changed their minds about, slavery being a key one, women getting the right to vote. A lot of the amendments have to do with voting because voting is a reserved power of the states determining who gets to vote. So if the Constitution, if the national government wants to take that power, they had to amend the Constitution. And also issues dealing with the presidency. So let's get into it. The 11th Amendment placed limits on lawsuits against the states. You could not sue a state for financial damages. If you could potentially bankrupt the state. This protects the states from lawsuits of that nature. It also settles an issue after the Revolutionary War where states were looking to recoup money that was paid in the war or used to fund the Revolutionary War. This kind of settled that issue that the Constitution originally didn't deal with. The 12th Amendment changed the procedure for electing a president and vice president. First place finisher becomes the president. Second place finisher becomes the first loser. It used to be the second place finisher became the vice president. Bad idea. Leads to problems if the president and vice president are not working well together. So this fixes that issue almost immediately after the first couple presidential elections showed that it might be a problem. 13th Amendment bans slavery and forced labor. It ends slavery after the Civil War, constitutionally banning that practice. 14th Amendment defines citizenship. It makes all people born in the United States a citizen. That was put in place also after the Civil War to deal with the issue of the freed slaves. They're no longer slaves, but what are they? This makes them citizens. It also guarantees due process, the second due process clause in the Constitution. It gives you that protection from not just the national government, the way the Fifth Amendment did, but also from state governments. That was also put in place to protect the freed slaves from southern states that were looking for revenge against them after they had lost their property as they saw it, and also grants equal protection to the law. The first and only appearance of the word equal in the Constitution. Again, idea making that law would treat people equally, dealing with the freed slaves. The 15th Amendment proves that the 14th Amendment still was not enough to get all the states to give equal treatment because many of the states were not giving the right to vote to the freed slaves. The 15th Amendment grants that right to vote, and you'll see they continue to come up with ways to prevent that ability to vote, but the 15th Amendment clarified, at least for that point in time, that everybody could vote regardless of their race. At least all men could vote. We're not yet to women. 16th Amendment, we get a time jump here. It gives the authority to the government to levy an income tax. You can pay a percentage of your income in taxes. Why did we need an amendment for this? Well, the national government had the power to tax, but they could only tax everybody the exact same amount. That was becoming hard to handle in the early 1900s. Some people were too poor to pay the amount, and this made it so you pay a percentage of your income, and it's still the system that we use today. The 17th Amendment, 1913, established the direct election of senators. Senators were originally in the Constitution picked by the governors or the state governments of each state. That led to corruption because people were just bribing the governors to get the spot as senator, and then they would go pass laws that benefited them but not the entire population. This changed the Constitution so the people elect senators. You guys know that every few years there's an election for senator in North Carolina. You're going to have that chance to vote for a senator because of the 17th Amendment. 18th Amendment, prohibition of alcohol. It ends the production, manufacture, and transport of sale within the United States, pushed by religious organizations that saw alcohol as being a social problem in the United States. An experiment that we'll see later on doesn't work as intended. 19th Amendment, finally, 1920, 130 years after the Constitution is put into place, women get the right to vote. They had fought for it ever since, and it took 130 years, but women the right to vote with the 19th Amendment in 1920, also known as suffrage, the right to vote. 20th Amendment, the lame duck amendment. It changes the time period between when a president is elected and when he takes office. Presidents are always elected in November. They used to wait all the way until March before they got the actual job. That meant we had a president in office who had either lost or had not run for re-election, ruling over the country from November until March, waiting for the new guy to take place. That guy in office was referred to as a lame duck. Hard for him to get anything done because the people have chosen a replacement. This shortened the time period to January. We could do this because technology improved. Transportation was quicker. We have railroads and airplanes by 1933 as opposed to horse and buggy back in 1789. 21st Amendment repeals the 18th Amendment ending prohibition. Organized crime, drinking actually increased under Prohibition. The 21st Amendment legalized and allowed the states, again, to make the rules as to how alcohol would be regulated within the country. 22nd Amendment limits the president to 2 terms in office. President Roosevelt was elected 4 times prior to this amendment, serving during the Great Depression and World War II. This amendment limits that to 2 terms, makes George Washington's example of serving 2 terms a tradition, but also a rule as a result of this amendment. And also puts the cap at 10 total years, because if a vice president takes over for a fallen president in the second half of his term, he can serve 2 years and then be elected twice himself. But if he takes over immediately and serves more than 2 years of the president's term, he can only be reelected once, and that would limit the possibility of going past the 10-year mark. So 2 terms for a president, Amendment 2.2. 23rd Amendment gives residents of the Washington, D.C. the chance to vote for president. Prior to this, the Constitution said the residents of the several states shall elect the president. You may not know this, but D.C. stands for District of Columbia. It is not a state. We have 50 states. D.C. is not one of the 50, so they didn't get to vote for president. They felt that was unfair. They were being taxed, but they didn't have a say in the government. So the 23rd Amendment altered that to give them the chance to vote for president if you lived in Washington, D.C. The 24th Amendment relates back to the 15th Amendment, gave all men the right to vote regardless of their race. Well, one way that southern states got around this, they were trying to prevent African Americans from voting and keeping, the power in the hands of the white people. So they said, well, if we can't ban you on the basis of your race, we'll just charge a high tax if you want to vote, basically make you pay to vote. And since the African Americans were disproportionately poor, they couldn't afford to vote, and that prevented them from participating in the democracy. The 24th Amendment is passed during the Civil Rights Movement, 100 years after the end of the Civil War, and the end of poll taxes are put in place, and this allows African Americans and other poor citizens to have the right to vote. 25th Amendment. The man in the picture is Lyndon Baines Johnson. He's taking the oath of office after John F. Kennedy was assassinated. We always knew that the vice president would get the job if the president died. What we didn't know is what would happen if both of them were killed at the same time. And because Lyndon Johnson was right near John F. Kennedy when he was shot, it made the Congress realize that they needed to address that issue. So they passed the 25th Amendment, telling us what would happen, that the vice president would take over if the president died, but if both both killed at the same time, they created a succession line, including the Speaker of the House, the Secretary of State, all of the various members of the president's cabinet, as we will learn in a later chapter. It also deals with situations where the president may not be able to do his job for a temporary reason. Maybe he's having surgery and is going to have anesthesia and won't be able to do the job. It sets up a process to deal with that. Or if a president is injured in an accident, is in a coma and can't do the job, it deals with temporary situations like that. Rounding out 26th Amendment, Vietnam War, 18-year-olds being drafted to fight, but they are not given the right to vote for any of their elected officials that are starting and continuing those wars. This lowered the voting age to 18, made it a little more fair. You're 18, you can vote due to the 26th Amendment, have a say on who all those leaders are. And finally, the 27th Amendment. This was originally going to be the First Amendment, believe it or not, but it didn't get enough votes back in 1789, so it kind of got put in a drawer and was forgotten until the early 1990s when a law student in Texas was doing a story or was doing a report on amendments and saw that this amendment was not given an expiration date. There was no date on it saying that it had to be ratified by a certain date. So he got state legislatures to vote in favor of it, and it was put into effect over 200 years after it was originally proposed. And what it does is it tells members of Congress if they are going to give themselves a raise, if they control the money, they can vote themselves a raise. If they're going to vote themselves a raise, they don't get to get the benefit of that raise until they face the voters, until the beginning of their next term. So basically, if the senators all voted themselves to have $5 million salaries, they would have to face the voters in the next election. They'd probably get voted out of office, and that raise would never accrue to them. So it's a way to prevent them from having their hands in the piggy bank and enriching themselves. That's Amendments 1 through 27. Hopefully that might help you if you feel like you didn't get what you needed from what we talked about in class.